Hello, everyone. Now remember, this is not a news show. This is a political platform. This is for talking points. If you want news, go somewhere else. With that being said, notice that I got a different cloth back there this time. I got my beer skull mug, and I got my Nintendo Switch as decorum. It's a coral pink Switch Lite. So go ahead and make your jokes about that. Oh, pink is for girls. You're gay. Yeah, well, it was the last one they had, and I don't give a shit. So, Anyway, to get on with today's video, since my nephew is not here right now, he's finishing school, so I got the opportunity. Anyway, today we're going to talk about the definition of socialism. Now, if you look it up in most reputable dictionaries, that being Oxford English Dictionary, Cambridge Dictionary, or the Collins Dictionary, which I believe is Australian, socialism is actually defined as the public ownership of the means of production. That is the first definition presented. The second definition is related to FDR and his policies, which were regarded as socialist. Not really. They were interventionist, but not truly socialist. If they were truly socialist, then he'd be supporting unions and public ownership. He did not. Well, he probably supported unions, but he did not support public ownership. He was not a socialist. But because interventionism kind of looks like socialism, some people who hate interventionism will slap that label on it. I like interventionism. I benefit from interventionism. Lots of people I know do. Because some people couldn't get by without it. And some others just need that little extra bit of help to get along. You can feel about that however you like. I'll admit that I'm actually a loser and have had a rotten luck trying to find a job. I'm still looking. I'll probably keep looking. But, hey, even us jobless losers who are caught in a perpetual loop of looking for work still need food, shelter, and whatnot. And yes, I am trying to work from home as an author. I've only made 2 ebooks so far, working on a 3rd. That's not much of a basis for a paycheck. But make no mistake, I am trying. Not all of us benefiting from interventionism and capitalism are lazy and just want to not want to have to work. I'm perfectly happy working if I have to. I just can't seem to get a job. Anyway, enough about me. My point was, do not confuse interventionism with socialism. It is the public ownership of the means of production. But the funny thing about that is that public ownership, well, the public does not have the necessary means to care for the means of production. The government does. And not only that, the government steps in on behalf of the public. So when we're talking about public ownership of the means of production, what we really mean is government ownership of the means of production. So it's, quote, public. And what this situation does is it creates centrality. It gives government unilateral control over the means of production and therefore, by extension, the stock market and the economy. Couple that with how many socialist systems lack voting which decentralizes power and authority, we enter a situation where government has unilateral control of the economy, the courts, the ability to make unilateral decisions, etc. You could argue that giving the president the unilateral decision ability to go to war at any time under George W. Bush, that could have been portrayed as a real socialist policy. Ironically enough. But I think you already know the problem of centrality, but I'm going to go ahead and explain it anyway. Though I think it should be fairly obvious. Being that centrality gives unilateral control of pretty much everything to the government. Then all that is required for some brutal dictator to take control of the system is to get elected into an office where that centrality, where he would have access to that centrality, and boom, he has all the power he could ever possibly want. If I was a dictator wanting to take over a country and oppress people and crush them under my foot, I wouldn't use capitalism. Capitalism decentralizes the economy. Where's the power in that? And democracy, democratic capitalism, decentralizes the economy and institutional power. A dictator in that system is seriously gimped out, especially if they have the Constitution blocking them, like the United States Constitution. But socialism, with a centralized economy and a centralized authority, now there is where power exists. That's where a dictator can have opportunities to crush people and to dominate. Socialism. And socialism has many, many forms. I am not familiar with them all, but I do know that they're all based on different Marxist philosophers coming up with their own sort of variant on Marx, making little tweaks to suit how they think it should happen. And that's sometimes a problem with philosophy, is that there's so many different schools of thought, and then there's a general lack of consensus, which confuses many people into thinking that philosophy is just bunk. But what they don't understand is that Nietzscheans generally agree with other Nietzscheans, and Platonians generally agree with other Platonians, and Stoics agree with other Stoics, etc., and Marxists agree with other Marxists to a point. The forms are sort of like... The forms of socialism are kind of like denominationalism in Christianity. Minor disagreements or little tweaks that they think are appropriate, creating different forms. But it really doesn't matter, because in the end it's all the same. But there are many, many forms. Communism is actually a form of socialism, if you didn't know it. It's a very extreme form, and if you have any doubt, just consider the fact that Karl Marx, the creator of socialism, co-authored the Communist Manifesto. It is idiotic to try and claim that there's no connection when it's more or less demonstrable. But yeah, within that realm there's Stalinism, Leninism, and so forth. There's just classic socialism, social capitalism, which is mixed economies, and that mixed economies work. We have a mixed economy right now. I'm okay with it for the most part, provided that such systems can be very high maintenance, and that can create a lot of problems sometimes. But I think it's largely worth it. There's utopian socialism. There's pragmatic socialism, which to me is a cop-out. Then there's Venezuelan socialism, which ended up being an utter failure thanks largely to Hugo Chavez not properly attributing money to sectors where it was needed, spending more on military than he did on infrastructure, which is oftentimes a mistake these dictators make, resulting in loss of power and water and even food for their populace. And so they have to crush rebellion with their newfound military strength, which will only last for a short time, relatively speaking. And that's really where I come to socialist dictators. Now, as far as socialist dictators go, Nikita Khrushchev, that is to say the communist dictator in Soviet Russia, was, as far as socialist dictators go, he was not that bad a guy, actually. He did some horrible stuff under Stalin, did a lot of the purging and such, and I feel like maybe his conscience got the better of him. To which I say, good. It shows that he had a conscience, but his agricultural policies failed, and as a result, millions of people ended up starving to death. Albeit it took all the way up through Stalin, It took all the way up through, I think, the last two guys in the Soviet Union to see that really come to fruition. And we can't put all the blame on Khrushchev, because even under Stalin, Stalin purged 10 million people because he couldn't feed them all. That is what created the Hollow Dahmer, which, unsurprisingly, many communists in America, many would-be communists, deny ever happened. And as far as I'm concerned, denying the Hollow Dahmer is just as bad, if not worse, than denying the Holocaust. It's the same fucking shit. You're denying a horrible event ever occurred because it's an inconvenience to your ideology. In which case, fuck you. But suffice to say, right, Nikita Khrushchev, will put him at the bottom as the nice dictator. Because he was fairly compassionate, but still wanted the power and central authority. And he worked pretty closely with Kennedy and was worried about being ousted by his own military. From Khrushchev, I think we can get up to guys like Brezhnev and Puddinghead, Gorbachev. Because Gorbachev and Brezhnev were relatively friendly people who just fairly friendly and surprisingly fairly kind individuals who just were horribly misguided in believing that the centralized authority and centralized power was good. Right? They were hella confused. They honestly did not know any better. They had probably grown up in the Soviet Union thinking, oh man, hearing demonizations of capitalism every day. It must be so horrible. Our central authority is so wonderful. It's sort of that indoctrination into that worldview, which is not based in any sort of fact, but in propaganda. You get up to, from there you can jump up to Lenin, who, honestly, as far as socialist dictators go, Lenin was not a hypocrite. His personal quarters and living space were preserved, and he was actually fairly consistent. He lived like the people he was ruling, which was very interesting. He wasn't in it for the sense of personal power like Stalin. He was quite literally in it for the ideology itself, which is actually kind of admirable. But he still had people killed and executed. He basically murdered the czars. The amount of blood on Lenin's hands is insane. And you get up from him, you get to Adolf Hitler. Yes, Adolf Hitler was a socialist. Nazi was an acronym. The English translation of the acronym is actually National Socialist Workers' Party. Look at some of the translations of Hitler's speeches. They were quite literally full of all the classic Marxist cliches about tearing down the system and capitalism does not serve the people, blah, 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 means of production, like the whole 9 yards. Hitler was a socialist. He was a socialist cliche. So it's actually funny how they try and force him onto capitalists saying he was one of you. No, he was one of you. What are you talking about? Right, because he suppressed free speech, he suppressed people's rights. Because that's the thing. Sure, Nazi Germany was horrible for the Jews, but it wasn't exactly good for the actual Germans either. That's the thing about white supremacist movements. Why would anyone in their right mind support them when you realize that it's not so great for the white people either? Because then they try and force you into this arbitrary standard of what they see as proper behavior, and if you don't follow it, your life is over. If you even dare question the Fuhrer, the Nazis would send their Gestapo and they disappear you in a heartbeat. and no one would ever see a hide or hair of you ever again. God only knows how many people the Gestapo came along and frickin' disappeared, and we have no idea what ever happened to them. And we probably never will. People who spoke out against Hitler wound up dead, mostly as a scare tactic to keep anyone from questioning his regime. Then from there we get Stalin, because Stalin was considerably worse. In fact, many people are considering the possibility that Stalin may have been a violent sociopath. I am not a psychologist. I don't know. I only know a little basic Jungian psychology for the sake of my own mental health and for my upkeep on that mental health. Beyond that, I don't know shit. What I know could be like an equivalent to psychological first aid. So I have no way of, I can't say that who is not a sociopath. But I'd say if anybody was, it would certainly be Stalin. So I would say that the worst dictator is Joseph Stalin. And where does Hugo Chavez, who I previously mentioned, where does he fit in that spectrum? I'm not sure. I haven't done a lot of research on Hugo Chavez beyond his obvious incompetence, misappropriating funds, which ended up hurting Caracas and other parts of Venezuela. With, Caracas experiencing frequent blackouts, and the water's probably not too terribly clean. Like, if I was going to visit Venezuela for any reason, I would probably bring a bottled water with me. I would not trust the water there. It's probably not very clean. It's probably got, rat poop or something in it. You don't know. In a nation where funds were misappropriated, bring your own water with you. Bring your own water with you. You're better off. I would say that he was just grossly incompetent, so I'll probably position him more towards Lenin and Khrushchev. Now, with that out of the way, Karl Marx himself, the mastermind behind socialism in its various forms, largely, the interesting thing about Karl Marx is that he was a philosopher, and a fairly respectable one at one time. He was a skilled ethicist and a reasonable epistemologist, so he's probably above average philosopher, very intelligent. He studied knowledge and how people could know things. He studied ethics. And his general ethical rules of his philosophy, I think, are actually pretty respectable. But the thing is, we've seen it time and time again, they do not work large scale. On a small scale model, where it's just only within the realm of interpersonal relations, socialist ethics are fine. By all means, share with your siblings, share with people, and think about things instead of my water or your water. Think about communal water. We can have a little bit of a few socialist adapted ideas within capitalism to be more ethical. That's perfectly fine. I mean, for God's sake, I use Linux, totally free and shared freely on the internet. That's basically a communal operating system. It's not private. And I'm perfectly fine with that. It's just when you apply it to the large scale, that's when people start starving. That's when people start starving. Right? I consider myself to be an ethical capitalist, first and foremost. And when I look at socialist ethics, I can look at them and be like, yeah, these aren't so bad, If you apply them on the small scale and use them appropriately and sensibly, and if someone doesn't want to share, do not force them to share, because that's when you turn into the dictator, albeit small scale. If they don't agree, they don't have to agree. But for those who do, right? But at the end of the day, Karl Marx had this notion that he could break down and criticize society using tools which came from outside society. Like, in regards to economics, he thought he could freely and fairly criticize economics with tools and ideas which came outside of economics. he almost entirely only used ethics and epistemology. Epistemology might be an interesting gateway into economics, but ethics and economics are entirely unrelated. How can you achieve an understanding of economics with ethics? You might get there through epistemology. That would be an interesting avenue to explore. But ultimately, right, many economists have stated that Karl Marx's contributions to economics were truly abysmal. And even Marx himself called economics the dismal science. In fact, his attitude towards economics bears a fairly close resemblance to the sort of dumb jock reacting to things like mathematics. It's like, math is stupid, you know? It's the same thing. Karl Marx is literally just saying, economics is stupid. Because he didn't actually understand it. And I have encountered socialists and had discussions with them, and thus far, not a single socialist or Marxist I have ever met has any real understanding of economic theory whatsoever. I could be wrong, certainly, but from what I've seen so far, I am not impressed. They clearly do not understand it. It is quite positively beyond them. No, what they study is Marxist theory, which is sort of a bizarre alternative to socialism, or not socialism, Marxist theory, which is an alternative to economics. But from what I understand of Marxist theory, it's not very scientific. Economics is fairly scientific, mostly utilizing mathematics. It primarily uses mathematics, and I think even there might be a kind of entropy involved with economics. But it's mostly just advanced math, combined with a little bit of distribution and such. I.e., this goes to here, this goes to here, this is coming from here, etc. Sort of logic problems. It's math and logic problems is what economics comes down to. It's money math. Whereas Marxist theory doesn't really involve a lot of mathematics. There's some logic problem solving, but there's not really a lot of math involved. It's mostly just Marxist ethics with some logic problems and maybe some distributionism. It completely disregards money math as far as I can tell. It's just like, oh, look, a problem, let's throw money at it. Where's the money going to come from? Oh, no, some guy. That's how a lot of these Marxists really are. So Karl Marx was basically punching above his weight class, really. He was criticizing something he did not understand. So he was sort of like the philosophical equivalent of the dumb jock. So moving on from him, you're probably thinking, if socialism is the public ownership of the means of production, what's really capitalism? Well, a lot of Marxists and socialists would say that capitalism is exploitation for profit, but that's not the actual definition of capitalism. The definition of capitalism you will find in any reputable dictionary, Oxford, Cambridge, or Collins. You can do what I do. You can cross-reference all three, because sometimes Cambridge will give a definition that's the same as Oxford, but worded differently. And that can be more enlightening if you cross-reference both. And Collins has a more down-to-earth, less academic definitions, but still in agreement with those. But the definition of capitalism is the private ownership of the means of production. The means of production is private. It belongs to some guy. It does not belong to the people or the government. It belongs to some guy. It is his or hers. This webcam is mine. It is a means of production. I bought it. It is mine. I am doing a capitalism right now. I am capitalizing for my benefit and for your benefit as well. Because that's the thing, is capitalist incentive, either profit incentive or social incentive, can sometimes promote altruistic behavior, right? We all want a healthy stock market so the economy has value that we can use to buy the things we need. A healthy stock market is a healthy economy, is a healthy America, and is a healthy you. So, a somewhat selfish motivation is causing me to make a video to essentially educate you. So, help me help you, essentially. That is essentially what capitalism often achieves in regards to altruism. Help me help you. Or help you help me. It can be exploitive, but it is not necessarily exploitive. It's a partnership, in a sense. I do you a favor, you do me a favor, the economy's healthy, we're all benefiting, we are all happy. And if someone is exploiting you for their own needs, of course, dump them on their head as soon as you can. But in a healthy, helpful partnership, it is the lifeblood of this system. Now, what's interesting about socialism, again, is how socialism needs a villain, right? It's all about revolution and breaking free of your chains and change the system, it's not working, blah, 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 you know? And I know this largely because that's literally all over Marxist work, his books, his things. But it's also because socialists try and market their ideology to working class mooks like me, right? We're their target audience. People who are struggling along, losers, people who are failing, right? They're always trying to market it to us, so I fucking know that socialism always needs a villain. They always have somebody to point the finger at, right? And, you know, they use these terms, proletariat and bourgeoisie, right? So, in their terms, I'm the proletariat and Mark Zuckerberg is the bourgeoisie, right? Although what's interesting is, you know, every socialist system has its own bourgeois. It's not always the same. Like in the Soviet Union, the czars were the bourgeois. It was the czars. That was their villain. And admittedly, the czars were certainly not innocent of killing. They were... Catherine the Great especially was pretty violent. They were all pretty bad. So they were really easy to vilify. Right, that was the Russian bourgeois. And unsurprisingly, when the Nazi regime appeared in Germany, again, they were socialists, Jews, particularly rich Jews, like certain individuals with wealthy Jews who were succeeding in German society more than naturalized citizens were, that was their bourgeois. Rich or otherwise successful Jews, and Jews in general, were their bourgeois. And they made it easy to vilify through peer pressure. And we see this happening everywhere socialism begins. Socialism always needs a villain in order to spark its revolution, so it can introduce its own system to override the system that came before it. And this is a very, very destructive and murderous process. So you're wondering, socialists in America, socialists and communists in America, who's their bourgeois? Well, depending on the group, who is their bourgeois? Well, if it's a democratic socialist, then their bourgeois is, again, someone like Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos. Millionaires and billionaires. Oh, but then just billionaires, because, you know, Bernie Sanders becomes a bourgeois. But suffice to say, they would target Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. Big business is the bourgeois. Government will protect you from the big business. I am more afraid of big government than big business because big business cannot send men in body armor with guns to shoot you. Big business does not have a military or a police. Government has a military and police. There is more to fear from big government than from big business, by a lot. Big business does not oppress your rights. Big government oppresses your rights. So yeah, that could be my conservative villain. Now there are other socialist groups. For some socialists, their bourgeois is actually white people, right? Like the BLM types, the anti-racists, like Ibram X. Kendi. We are their bourgeois. Because, we got less melanin. That somehow makes us, more advantaged. And we ask these people for proof that black people can't succeed in America, and they can't come up with anything. They never have been able to. All they have are buzzwords and feelings, right? But that's what they do. The anti-racism is just racism wearing a mask. Like, they hate white people, they hate Asians, and to some extent they even hate black people because they want to put them in a box and say, you must think this arbitrary way or you're an Uncle Tom, right? So that's a kind of, that's racist socialism. You're a bourgeois or a bourgeois or a proletariat based on your skin color. Because that's racist as fuck. Ibram X. Kendi is a racist son of a bitch. But yeah, that's generally how it works. It's, socialism needs a villain. And this is what initiates what I have termed, this is my terminology, trademark, socialist revolution loop. Trademark. That is my term. No, just kidding. You can go ahead and use it. I don't care. You can use socialist revolution loop. In fact, I encourage you to use it. I use other people's terminologies all the time, so you can go ahead and use mine. I don't care. I'm consistent on that point. But yeah, the socialist revolution loop. Quite simply, the concept is this. Socialists unite. The system isn't working. Revolution. Okay, socialists unite. The system still isn't working. Revolution. Okay, this country is destroyed, but I'm sure if we try it again in another country, it'll all be good. The system here isn't working. Socialists unite. Revolution. The system's still not working. Socialists unite. Revolution. And they just keep going and going and going and going, trying to loop through a circular process that never achieves what it originally aimed to achieve. And then this will go on in infinity until everyone is starved, shot, murdered, disappeared, or dead. And somehow they'll still believe it can all just magically work if we just try one more time. Socialists have been given enough chances. Just stop. Your system doesn't fucking work. And it never will. And it all stems from the fact that you followed the philosophy of a guy who didn't understand economics, like the dumb jock who doesn't understand math. Now, you're asked, what makes capitalism so great? Well, take a look around you. Look at all the plenty you have. Look at all the plenty. Look at all the wonders you have. Capitalism is the most powerful driving force for a healthy economy with a currency of high value. And a high value currency is more than capable of generating tons of goods and services for everyday people that you can use. Even losers like me who can't seem to get a job and have to inch along on side hustles and benefits and occasionally coasting on goodwill. Compared to my ancestors, I live like a king. I have things that they could never even dream of. I have smart TVs. I have computers. I have this camera. I have game consoles. I'm wealthy as fuck. There's places in the world that have way less than me and will never have as much as I have. There, I would be as rich as all the czars. And I don't have a fucking job. Right? That's the power of capitalism. That's beautiful. When has socialism ever achieved anything like that? Never in the history of the world. Ever. Also, final point. You know how socialism always needs a villain? Capitalism, motherfucker, does not need a villain. It does not need a villain. It does not need to vilify. It does not need a revolution. All capitalism needs is a stable system to grow in. To grow an economy through the use of economics, which again is money, math, and logic problem solving. And that's all you need to run a sound capitalist economy. And it just keeps going and going and going. The economy just keeps on growing, and it keeps on changing, and it keeps on raising the value of the currency. Occasionally there are some snags. There are some things that come along that devalue the currency. But these are mostly temporary roadblocks, which are easy to navigate around or to get over if you know what you're doing. So here's my final message. Put down the Marx. Put down Karl Marx. Stop wasting your energy on him. Lay him in his grave. He is dead. His desires were for naught. Put down Marx. Pick up some Thomas Sowell. Pick up some Milton Friedman. And yes, maybe even Ayn Rand. Although Ayn Rand was kind of selfish and heartless, even by capitalist standards. And learn some real-ass economics, preferably from the FEE. Learn how it all really works. Anyway, with that being said, tschüss. Peace.